Mr. Speaker, this time last year, by ramming legislation through the House, this House under urgency, this national government staged a coup against democracy in Auckland. This national government bypassed Aucklanders' right to a referendum under the Local Government Act, and that minister sitting there, Mr. Rodney Hyde, embarked on the most cynical undermining of democracy this country has seen in many a year. Now, Aucklanders thought that was bad. Aucklanders thought it was bad, and they were right. And people all around the country have been wondering who's next for the chop. And today, the people of Canterbury have experienced an even more barefaced outrage: the abrogation of their district council and the sacking of their elected representatives. And I want to read a quote, Mr. Speaker, a quote that says that elections are central to democracy, but they're not always on their own a magic or quick fix solution. And I invite members of this House to guess who said those words. Could it be Nick Smith, maybe? Wyatt Creech? Nicky Wagner, maybe? I don't know, Amy Adams? Could it even be Rodney Hyde? Actually, was Frank Bainimarama in 2008. Elections won't be held for the Canterbury District Council until 2013. Perhaps slightly before Commodore Bainimarama plans to hold elections in Fiji, but not much before. Welcome to Fiji on the Rakaya, I say. You see, Mr. Speaker, this government has form when it comes to riding roughshod over our nation's democratic traditions, and that's what's happening right here tonight in this House as the elected representatives of the people of Canterbury are sacked by Nick Smith and Rodney Hyde. They've done it before. In Auckland, they bypassed Aucklanders' right to a referendum on forced amalgamation. They've stolen the democratic rights of local communities in Auckland. They've rammed through changes in this House under urgency. And there's been a rushed and inadequate consultation process. But in all of that, Mr. Speaker, in all of that process over the last year, at least they made a pathetic attempt to listen to Aucklanders, even though it was mostly a fake listening campaign. And no wonder Aucklanders feel ignored, and no wonder 56% of them told the Auckland Herald the other day that they don't even want to be part of the super city.
Order.
You see, they did have a select committee, actually, but are they having a select committee for this bill? No, they don't even think the people of Canterbury deserve the courtesy of a select committee process. This outrage, Mr. Speaker, shows a total disdain for the democratic rights of the people of Canterbury. You see, for this National Party and its cronies, democracy is an inconvenience. It's an irritation. So when it gets in the way of their objectives and their agenda, what do? They give it the chop. Sir. Because the Canterbury District Council, Environment Canterbury, has had a very difficult time dealing with the tensions associated with water allocations. They've had a difficult time. No one has come down to the House tonight suggesting that Environment Canterbury has done a good job. No one's suggesting that. No one's saying they've done a good job. They have had problems. But what's the response of this government? To take them out the back to the woodshed and dispatch them with a blow to the head. 14 councillors are getting the chop, and with them goes the democratic rights of the people of Canterbury. Now, for the next 3.5 years, the people of Canterbury will have no say, no input, and there'll be no accountability for the actions that Rodney Hyde and Nick Smith's appointees are going to make on their behalf. They'll have no say, no input and no accountability, because that's the way Nick Smith and Rodney Hyde like it. The question I have, Mr. Speaker, is this National Party so divorced from our country's traditions, for our democratic institutions? Do they care so little that they're not even embarrassed in the slightest by what they're doing tonight? They have no conscience, no embarrassment about what they're doing, abrogating the democratic rights of the people of Canterbury simply because Environment Canterbury is not doing their bidding, simply because the organisation is struggling to come to terms with one of the most difficult environment and development issues this country faces. For this National Party, that is enough justification to take Environment Canterbury out the back and knock it on the head. You'd think that this government would have thought twice before doing this, given the bath that they're taking in Auckland right now. You'd think that the anger and resentment that you find from Pukekohe to Wellsford, from Aucklanders of all political persuasions, the resentment and the mistrust and the anxiety about our democratic institutions that the people in Auckland are currently expressing. But see, they don't like what this government's doing. They don't like the fact that Rodney Hyde, whose party earned 3.65% of the vote in the last election, is running local government policy and undertaking one of the most damaging initiatives that local government's seen in this country's history. You see, people understand what's going on. They're not silly. They understand that this government's taking away their rights, taking away the rights of local communities to have a say, and handing over those rights and that power to Nick Smith and Rodney Hyde's hand-picked appointees. They don't like it. This National Party's got a very retro approach to democracy, very retro. They're taking us back to the future, actually. It's not democracy in the 21st century. This national government's taking us back to oligarchy in the days of the 19th century, and that's the kind of politics that they're comfortable with. You see, Mr. Speaker, it's so much more efficient to have the great and the good sitting around the boardroom table making decisions on the behalf of everybody else. It's so much more efficient, it's so much tidier to have the boardroom in control instead of the ballot box. And that's the way Rodney Hyde likes it. It's not a lot different to Rodney Hyde and Stephen Joyce's so-called council-controlled organisations that are going to be in charge of 75% of the assets, income and the expenditure of the Auckland Council if he has his way and continues with his agenda of corporatising Auckland local government and handing over that city's resources and assets to his hand-picked mates. Consider this, the cavalier disregard for our democratic institutions, the speed with which this government is willing to throw them out the window and install their own hand-picked appointees to run our institutions. The whiff of oligarchy that hangs over this disgraceful legislation. Make no mistake, this government is a threat to our democracy. For 3.5 years, the people of Canterbury will have no representation, but they'll continue to pay rates, but they'll have no say and no input into how the commissioners deal with their resources and their environment. Rodney Hyde and Nick Smith are going to take over because they think they know better. They're going to handpick the decision makers and try and get them to ram through their agenda. You see, National doesn't trust the people. It's only a few months until elections. This government doesn't trust the people of Canterbury to look at the situation and make an informed judgment and elect their democratically elected representatives to take office and sort the situation out. They know there's a problem, they know things need to change, but this government doesn't trust them. Oligarchy and cronyism go together, Mr. Speaker. We've seen it in Auckland. We saw the former National Party President, Michelle Bogue, advising John Banks' mayoral campaign and hired by Rodney Hyde's Auckland Transition Agency to recruit senior executives for the Super City. For an entire week, Rodney Hyde Mark Ford and Michelle Bogue and John Banks all denied there was a conflict of interest. Because you see, they don't really see things that way. They don't see there's a conflict of interest to have your cronies in there making decisions on your behalf. We've got Rodney Hyde and Stephen Joyce appointing the directors of the CCO.
Sorry to interrupt the member. His time has expired.